Another graph physics presentation and such. So anyway, comments are just terrible. Haven't just aren't any worth reading or worth arguing. But I'm stuck with what I'm stuck with. So this whatever he is, Jakahada, you are a thief. Idiotic statement, but okay, let's play with that. At 4:30, a time code. You say the two paths don't have to be identical length. Yes, I've said that forever. As long as I've known interferometers, I've pointed out that if all you're measuring is the, interference, that is, some notion that they're out of phase, which I've also contended is pretty much impossible because there's no light source that produces light that's perfectly in phase. All the photons are perfectly lined up. So I've always pointed out how that's kind of silly anyway. But yeah, there's been no point where I've argued anything other than that. So, I mean, first, if you're going to say somebody did something, you'd first have to note where they said the opposite somewhere. Well, anyway, let's go on. Identical length, yet you spend dozens of your moronic rigged math videos arguing that the photon's travel time is identical on the two paths. Now, arguing distance and arguing phase are first off two different things. And as I have pointed out, I don't think the light can ever go into the experiment in phase. So, but the idea that distance is somehow relevant to this experiment, as I've attempted to point out, has to do with the fact that the light is diverging and that you can measure distance by measuring how this width changes over distance. So I'm arguing that yes, this idea that you're measuring phase differences seems preposterous when you do the math. I mean, measuring nanometer differences, you're almost into the realm of Brownian motion destroying the experiment. I mean, realistically, the wavelength of light is really kind of small. Like, I think it's you can get 200 wavelengths of light, maybe 250 at green light, across a human hair. So 250, dividing a human hair into 250 little slivers, you gotta appreciate those are pretty small slivers. Well, anyway, let's move on. Identical paths. Everyone can see your silly videos where you keep making a fool of yourself arguing about hypotenuse lengths. Well, clearly it's really relevant if you're saying that photons are moving at an angle and that any idiot can understand, like on a checkerboard, that jumping the diagonal squares moves a lot more distance than the squares. Diagonal, very long. Squares, not so long. So you don't think that's relevant? The geometry isn't relevant? No, I think it's like really relevant. And it has to do with the fact that you can't possibly, alright, I had this mostly figured out, that you can't possibly, hit something in a location, alright, if you're moving a longer distance to get there. Like you don't have, like if it was a light beam and it had to get to these two locations at exactly the same time, it can't do that, you see, because it runs not enough distance. Distance is enough here, not enough distance here. Okay, but that's not a valid concept according to you. Okay. Lengths and photons splitting, momentum, and whatnot. So again, you don't understand the logical argument that if you are counting, how long it takes something to do something, and all you count is I went up, I count that part. When I go sideways, I won't count that part. I'll count the part going up, but I won't count the part going sideways. That would be cheating. Okay. Only after I wrote a comment on your video telling you that the paths have to be in phase, not identical. Again, I can show you a Hoffley video where he concedes this point after I made it. So I mean, What are you talking about? Again, you sort of have to demonstrate where I was ever arguing that it was ever practical or rational that they were measuring these, that they were moving mirrors, the multiples of a wavelength, that they go through 72 cycles, and in those 72 cycles, those are divisions of a single wavelength of light, and that they're actually cycling through one single wavelength of light, which is pretty much guaranteed to be affected by Brownian motion. So how could you do it anyway? Because every cycle would be, the tiny changes in temperature would be causing all kinds of jiggling that would make it impossible for you to do this counting. Anyway, you have now stated this. So I never stated anything else. No evidence I ever stated anything else. So clearly no evidence that you inspired me with a piece of knowledge I didn't already have, idiot. Jeez. And yet you'll say thief. So you have absolutely no proof of this thievery I did, that I gained some insight from anything you ever said in your entire life has ever affected a single neuron in my brain. You have absolutely no evidence that that ever took place. And yet, like all these arrogant assholes, you make these bold claims. Because that's all you people have, are extraordinary claims and less than ordinary evidence. Alright, you hid my comment, you don't have any evidence of that either, on your video, like the chicken shit thief. Okay, so again, no evidence that I ever did that. No evidence that I didn't do exactly what I'm doing right now, which is reading it and then deleting it. Because it's full of accusations you don't defend with anything called evidence. The chicken shit thief that you are. So again, another example where somehow I have to defend myself against your claims. That you could just walk into court and you can just say, he's a rapist. And you don't have to prove it, nothing else. I have to prove I'm not a rapist. You don't have to actually prove the rape. You don't have to actually prove the crime. You just make the accusation and oblige me, okay, to provide the proof. Like play the Holiday video clip or something. So you're saying I have to defend myself against your accusation. You can't prove your accusation. You don't have any evidence of your accusation. Yet I'm obligated to leave your comment up and go to the trouble to find a 2-year-old video of mine where I say exactly the same thing, that it doesn't matter where this mirror is. Why do they keep talking about how these things have to be equal length? They don't have to be equal length. They just have to be somewhere in the ballpark. They don't even have to be somewhere in the ballpark, and to some extent. Obviously, you wouldn't have equal temperature effects, or the environmental effects wouldn't be controlled for if you don't have them similar lengths. Alright, and now you are repeating what I wrote. So, complete rubbish as a comment, complete garbage as an accusation. You have no evidence that any of this ever took place. Like you have in any way edified me on any subject in the history of your existence. You fucktard. Alright. Moving on. I also wrote in that comment, oh, it must have been such a magnificent comment, that any experiment about the single double slit interference must be done with a single photon source to be relevant. Well, good for you for saying that. Okay, yeah. I don't think it has to be relevant. I think it just should be done to prove, one way or another, what's interfering here. What's exactly traveling through this experiment? Are we doing quantum mechanics, or are we doing some kind of new invention? So if it's quantum mechanics, then yeah, you kind of have to have single photons have wave packets, wave probability packets that are created. You know, one photon creates 2 wave packets, and the 2 wave packets take the different paths and then come back together. Now, obviously, it's not going to make much sense because everybody can see the light going in the 2 directions, and it's still light, it's still photons, it's not wave packets. But anyway, continuing. Doing the experiment with a laser emitting gazillions of photons is irrelevant to a QM discussion. I'm glad you're saying that. I've said it from some point in the history of this conversation. But again, you don't have evidence I said it because you said it. I said it because I've always known it as a notion that this is part of the context of this experiment, is I'm supposed to understand where the interference comes from. And I've actually made videos where I say it directly as a question to people. Where do you say the interference happens? Where are the photons Huygensing? Where are they doing their, I'm not a thing, I'm not a corpuscle anymore, I'm some sort of probability wave packety thing. Where do they do that? I've drawn it and said those exact words, idiot. Alright, anyway. I am sure you will also steal that statement of mine. So another accusation, even after doing tons of interference videos with your silly laser. So he says there's something silly about the stuff I've gleaned as information in the process of doing these silly experiments. So the first obvious thing I gleaned was a plain piece of glass is an excellent beam splitter. Then I've also gleaned the information that if the glass has substance on it that causes light diffraction, that you get the exact same pattern you get in the interferometer experiment, which seems a huge bit of reveal. And that it's also been demonstrated that what really matters is the distance between the dirt layer and the glass surfaces. That is somehow integral to the creation of the ringed pattern. And that's why it's always consistent, the pattern. It's because it has to do with consistent distances of reflection. You can't just put the dirty layer over here and move the dirty layer. That doesn't work. The dirty layers has to be fixed, and that creates the rings. That's not useful information. I think it's incredibly and profoundly interesting in the sense that nobody talks about it. You know, the LIGO people don't tell us those things. They don't explain that, oh yeah, when we say beam splitter, we don't really mean beam splitter, we mean beam diffractor. Now, wouldn't that be the honest way to describe it? A better plan, or some other plan. Anyway, okay. So moving on. So I don't know how insane are you people going to become? I mean, you're mocking. First, you whine that I'm not doing enough experiments, even though I don't really have the money or the technology to do them really well. But then when I do them and find out obvious and simple things, you know, that should be obvious and simple to anybody who's ever done the experiment with any kind of honesty. These are observations they all should have figured out. Like, hey, I get this thing, even though the mirrors, you know, how come I'm getting? Oh, the mirror's dirty. It never, you know, it didn't occur to anybody to figure out that, oh, that's significant. Anyway, as for your TON theory, I won't bother commenting on it because for most people with a brain, it takes all but 30 seconds to see why your theory is a laughable joke. Alright, so when Richard Feynman said, I wish they wouldn't teach kids that photons are waves, he wasn't saying anything meaningful. He was like drunk that day. So when he argued that photons are corpuscle or particles, he was an idiot. He was being laughably stupid, because that can't possibly be the right answer. And you could prove him wrong in just seconds. And yet you never chose to do it. All this time Feynman's videos have been up, and how come you haven't corrected Richard Feynman on that silly statement? You know. Anyway. Yet you have spent 5 years dragging that dead rat inside your brain. So again, this thing you think you can argue, I have exactly spent these years arguing it, and yet you can't see any kind of victory for yourself in expending the 30 seconds. It took you more than 30 seconds to write all this crap, to make all these stupid accusations. Why couldn't you just simply explain why particles can't possibly be how the universe works? Why don't you explain it? You know, why Feynman is wrong when Feynman says they're corpuscles, they're particles. All right, the just punishment is that you should spend another 5 years on this comical joke of a theory. And again, you don't see any well, you're the one not, like I said, you're not putting your name on any of this. So, history is not going to be able to, oh, it's just a screen name. But I will say that if I ever have the opportunity to defend my theory before I'm dead, in the sense of, or whatever the right way to say this is, if I'm proven right in the end, all right, I would ask that, just out of fairness, okay, that you assholes be outed, that the information be gotten from Google. Who are these assholes that write this rubbish? Why weren't they willing to put their name on these bold statements of thief and idiot and all this big talk? Why weren't they willing to put their name on these accusations they're making? Because frankly, I want you to be seen for who you are. A clock-stopping, narrow-minded, closed-minded fanatic. An idiot. Fanatic. You believe in what? You're a Tesla nut, right? Where else can this crap go? You're sitting there arguing that, well, it seems clear that some of their silly quantum mechanics theories have to be wrong. Well, it must be because you have some sillier theory. Seriously. What else could be the right answer? Anyway, seriously, step aside and look at your Ton theory with a functioning brain. Yeah, I have, and I pointed out how it explains perfectly magnetism. I mean, it does a beautiful job of explaining exactly why magnets attract and magnets repel. Just excellent. And gravity is just, it's beautiful explanation of gravity. And the one liability it has, I mean, I've gotten rid of all the other critiques that could possibly be made, is the idea of a little bit of motion drag, velocity drag in this field. But I've given perfectly viable, I think, explanations of how that drag can be overcome, just as the phenomenon of magnetism overcomes, this idea of attraction and repulsion just being this simple. You turn it this way, it's repulsive. You turn it this way, it's attractive. A tiny, subtle change, and you get dramatically different results. And likewise for motion through the universe. It's likely just a catch, a simple little change, and motion is dragless. But anyway, all right, seriously. So he says the same thing over again. Step aside and look at your Ton theory with a functioning brain. It takes 30 seconds to see why it falls apart. And again, if it takes only 30 seconds, why can't you do it? Why can't you accomplish this defeating it task? And again, all you have to defeat it is one circumstance. It's the only circumstance Feynman cited. One circumstance. You say, okay, it doesn't fit this one tiny thing. It fits everything else. It fits so well, we'll call it mock gravity, because it fits gravity every way, and it just creates one little side effect. All right, and so we'll just dismiss the whole thing because of one side effect, because they're not clever enough. And yet these are the very people who like Hawking or something, will invent things like many worlds. They'll invent preposterous explanations to solve a mathematical problem. Dark energy, dark matter, they'll just invent completely extraterrestrial, wacky junk as solutions to their problems. And yet they can't, they won't even accept a perhaps somewhat vague, a foggy explanation of how there could be mechanisms that allow something to travel through a medium without friction. That there could be something about how it's shaped, or something about how it interacts that compensates for anything we could call something like friction or group drag. So they're willing to accept bizarrely, insanely bizarre explanations for why photons are interfering or something, and they'll create they have Huygens, and they have many worlds, and then they have Copenhagen, and they have radar, and they have all these excuses, all these bizarre inventions for which there's no physical evidence any of it ever happens to solve their problems, your problems. So you accept physics, accepting complete God-of-the-gap solutions. And yet you'll sit there and say you can beat me in a 30-second statement, and yet you won't make it? You coward. I mean, such bold claims. And you won't even show up for the fight. You won't even put your name on the fight. You won't show up as an honest man in the fight. And then you won't throw an honest punch. Amazing. Alright, P.S. In case you're wondering, I'm not Ken Wheeler. Well, I think that would be obvious because there's no hyperburloids in here. Or Holiday fan. Oh, you're not a fan. Okay. So what? You're some kind of loop-de-doo. Okay, it's clearly you're fighting for some agenda here. The only Ken Wheeler videos I have watched are the snippets in your videos, and just from that I can see he is a schmuck. I have the utmost contempt for people who hide behind jargon and complicated words needlessly. Well, that's good on you. Maybe you learned that from me. Yeah, maybe you stole that from me. You fucking thief, you stole that idea from me. It's the surest of an inferiority complex. Well, I don't know. You want to go into a bunch of speculation about all kinds of things about why people use jargon? I think sometimes they have to use jargon because it's the only way to hide the fact that their theory is a pile of shit. But anyway, confident people communicate their thoughts in simple, straightforward language. Yes, my side wins there. As Einstein and Feynman said, oh dear, if you can't explain something in simple language, you don't understand it yourself. Yeah, well, there's lots of Feynman that is, there's a huge hypocrisies in Feynman. 1 minute Feynman would argue for a kind of rational checkerboard universe, mechanical system, and the next minute he's off on some, well, one electron could have made all the interactions in the entire universe because I sort of like this idea of borrowing energy from the future. I kind of like this idea of, we don't really need to worry about this time thing, so we can just steal energy from the future, make something happen, and then we'll give it back in the future when we get there. Kind of on their face, silly explanations. So, Feynman's not a very reliable source of anything. A reliable source of good quotes, but unfortunately they're not consistent quotes. I mean, his quotes are contrary. You could use Feynman to argue any position, because somewhere Feynman said something. Okay, and all of those somethings, if you threw them in a pile, it all turned into mud, because for as much blue thinking he did just as much red thinking. His shift, his focus shift was so wobbly, that it all turns into white light, whatever. Yes, he had no grounding at all. He just went wherever the conversation started is where he would jump in, and he would accept any premises. Hope you send for something enlightening. Okay, that's just Ken Wheeler crap. So, yeah, fuck you and your accusations. I mean, really, come here with proof before you start using a word like thief. Or you imply that I have in some way done something dishonest in these videos. That's just fucking being rude, asshole. So I wish I could turn off this spam feature, because obviously people throw shit in here that I wouldn't have thrown in here, and I don't even get to see some of these comments sometimes because I don't go rushing off to the spam folder and blah blah blah. But anyway, we've already done this this mathematical argument where the 40%, the speed of light, blah 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 blah, and I'll still point out you can't hit the mirror except in a position where the reflection off the mirror won't be where the beam splitter is. So to hit the beam splitter, you can't hit the mirror. To hit the mirror, you can't hit the beam splitter. Facts and such. So deal with that, or fuck this bullshit. Anyway, I don't remember what this was all about, but we'll read some of this since we're here. You might want to do some study in electromagnetic wave propagation. Fuck you. You might want to do some study recognizing that when you look around, it looks like the inside of your colon, because that's where your head is, fuckhead. Anyway, versus the current photons as the replacement theory. Wave propagation. They're already their current theory is a wave theory, idiot. They just don't use ether. They use it's electromagnetical. It's waving in two places at once, but they make up a bunch of crap. Again, this whole wave thing. I don't know how people are so defensive. What are you defending? You're defending some idiotic idea that the word wave, which has to do with things that spread, and you're saying no, this is a special kind of wave that behaves like no other wave in the universe, in the sense that it just goes in one direction, doesn't spread. And then it waves in both this way and it waves this way, but it doesn't wave this way or that way, or no, it only does these specific kind of pushes or expansions and contractions in these specific planes by some specific magical mechanism. I mean, it's just so fucking idiotic. But anyway, also your idea of positive and negative photon. Okay, well, that's probably okay. Yes, two kinds, black and red. It is the only way photons are going to replace a wave, but you still run into problems, etc. Says you, idiot. How do you get a equivalent photon representation to a wave at 90 degrees or maximum positive, and also a photon at, say, half the maximum? Photons, as most physicists will say, don't come in degrees of photon. But whatever, I don't know. Again, I have no obligation. If you're saying, how do I explain why ultraviolet light has more energy than infrared light, my argument would be is because it's more bullets and they're coming at a faster rate. And that's the reason why they have effects that are different. But that their total energy is no different. The individual bullets have no difference in momentum. How do you get a transmitted photon at varying value levels? Well, like I said, that just doesn't happen. So you'd have to first prove to me that you have variable photons. Like a wave can be several values varying from 0 to maximum positive or negative and still remain within the allotted time slice in pico, femtoseconds, and so on. Also, that is enough in itself, whatever that crap was. So again, I would argue there's no evidence that the individual photons have any magical ability to be strong or weak. Also, how do you distinguish between a transmitted photonic signal from a source A from interference photons from another source, which also affect the received photon level? Well, I don't believe interference is an actual event. So again, why don't you prove it is? Show me this interference thing. Since a photon is a photon, right? Yeah, and again, where do photons? Where's your example of photons having as a in some elemental sense having a variable identity? I've actually seen, oh dear, electric wave both on other vids and in my own experiments. Whatever. Why don't you link to the magical video that shows the electric wave? And when RF is transmitted, the field on the antenna is a sinusoidal waveform. Again, measured with what instrument? How do you know this? However, it looks like a hourglass because you don't know which alternation is positive. So again, just mush. There's nothing that we can make out of that. If you can imagine a cup of water being poured into a dish, the water molecules spread out across the whole volume of the dish to level out. Transmitted photons would do the same thing across the antenna, like a capacitor storing charge. there is no magic force to make them stay within the signal shape you are transmitting, also antenna length. And shapes would have no meaning since wavelengths do not apply. Says you. I mean, frankly, there's no evidence of this. You know, how exactly the pressure builds up and how exactly photons are released. My argument is they're released. So they already have the movement, and you're just letting them go. So it's like the Earth letting the moon go. Like if we could just all of a sudden we could just stop the gravity from pulling the moon down, and the moon was free to go. It would just be released at its current velocity in a direction. And that's all that photons are doing. And so clearly their waveform can't do some kind of, well, we build up speed and then we get to a peak velocity and then we slow down. They're not doing that. So if there's a shape to any function of their transmission through time, it's going to be a very geometrically angular shape to their wave. They're not doing any gradual speed up and then gradually slow down bullshit. Alright, anyway, where was this? Force them to stay within signal shape since wavelength does not apply. The electrical signal transmitting would swing positive, negative, and if following electron flow theory, again, all this crap, I don't accept any of these premises. To me, the argument is quite simple. Photons are individual things. The distance between them is the wavelength. The photons don't give a shit. They can be this wavelength, this wavelength, this wavelength. We recognize the difference between this, 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 and this. Photons couldn't care less. They move in straight lines at the speed of light. Alright, push away and then sucked back, or so this idea of something sucked back is idiotic, or charged photon, neutral photon, whatever. You're going to have to do a lot better than type this kind of rubbish as a comment. Either way, you cannot use the same photon to represent two separate states, or can you? Again, the photon has no, the state is its position and its velocity in a direction. And that's all it has for states. All the other states are the same. All the photons are the same mass, all the photons are the same everything. The only thing that changes is which way they're going and which way they're aligned. So they have polarization, which means as they're following each other in a row, they have slight variation in how they're lined up, and that would be their polarization. Light polarization. Conservation of momentum fails in an inertial reference frame different from the center of mass reference frame. Well, that doesn't sound like rational crap to me, but let's see. Oh, if I'm going to play a video, that's going to require... Oh, it's no sound. Good. Two identical particles are propelled towards each other by gravitational force. See, right there, you're in trouble, right? There's no gravitational force. You have to explain the force. The force is part of the activity of the two particles. So if it's photons hitting electrons, we know that they're not going to move together like this smoothly. They're going to move together like, because electrons don't move in straight lines. But anyway, I'll watch the rest of that later. I don't know. This doesn't seem like much of a proof. Let's just play it through. It's only 38 seconds. Alright, under Lorentz transformation, their velocities become W and U. So now they're moving in the same direction, and one has to catch the other one. Total momentum increases with time. Well, it doesn't, I don't think, but whatever. I'm clearly the paradoxes of this stupid frickin' Lorentz transformation bullshit, this made up, let's put everything on a curved line that probably should be on a straight line, is, in my opinion, bullshit. So, yes, I don't really have much use for Lorentz transformations. because I think they assume that because gravity is the inverse square law, everything's the inverse square law, and it's not. Especially on the particle to particle level, no. Anyway, enough of a video, I think. So comments just suck. I mean, I make videos and I point out these arguments. Plain piece of glass creates an excellent beam splitter. Why have we been told all this time that somehow the silvering, the half mirroring of the glass is what's splitting the light, when we know, no, just the glass splits light. We already know a plain piece of glass splits light. Why do we need silver on it? What's the role of the silver? If it's not to split the light, then it must be doing something else. If it's not splitting the light, what's it doing? Simple question. 0 answers. Okay. So, till next time. And such. So it should be, the sound should be, oh fuck. Oh, there it is. Still there. Sorry. It should be better, because I have a noise filter on now. Because somehow my sound card can't produce anything called quiet. Quiet. It doesn't like doing quiet. Quiet. So I have to filter out the fucking noise that shouldn't exist. Alright. Anyway. Till next time. Such. It's a computer that you can't, doesn't have any expansion slots, so I can't just pop a new sound card in. But anyway, I guess I could get a USB mic or something, and some other kind of bullshit, but whatever. We'll see if I have to resort to that or not. Till next time, and such.